Welcome to Dream It, Dare It, Do It, Live the Life You Want. I am Jasmine, your host, and I apologize for not having been there the past few weeks. It's been busy and slow at the same time, if that makes any sense to you guys. And today I have Chana Studley that is with us. Hi, Hannah.
Hi, nice to see you.
Hi, nice to see you too. So, guys, I invited Hannah because I've been in the community. I've been seeing on Facebook this book, Beyond Diagnosis, Beyond Diagnosis, and I was like, huh, I wonder. So I figured let's give her a call and see if she'd join us. And she said yes. So here she is. So thank you for accepting the invitation.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
So this is not your first book, right? I heard you say somewhere, I think this is your sixth. Is that what you said?
Fourth.
Fourth. Still, that's many books.
Yeah, here's two of the other one.
Okay.
So and I have ideas for three more months. So hopefully I'll get to six. I've got seven in my head. So we'll see. Hopefully I'll get there.
I have a girlfriend who's a writer, and she's been doing a lot of writing, but in magazines, and she's done children's book, and I know that she wants to write a book. So I feel her now saying, "But how did you do it? How like what like triggered it? Like how did you not have insecure thinking about it?"
That's a great question. I said to my friend the other day, I just gave a copy to my close friend, and she said, "How did you do this?" I'm like, "I don't know." I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, how to do that? It's massive and there's like so much research in here, and I really don't know how I did that. But the idea came. I was literally sitting on my sofa one Saturday afternoon, and this idea just popped in my head. And I thought of all the people that we know of in the Three Principles community who have recovered from um, mental health diagnoses and have been told that they're going to be sick or disabled for the rest of their lives. They've been told they have a chemical imbalance, and we can discuss these things, or it's genetics, and they'll have to be on medication for the rest of their lives. And they've been through hell, and then they got well and they've recovered and they're off medication. And when I say recovered, meaning they don't need treatment anymore. It's not like, oh, I've recovered, but I have to keep going to the therapist. No, they're off medications, they're free of treatment, and they're living their best lives. And I thought, wouldn't that be a great resource to get all those stories together so that when people come across this understanding, they say, yeah, but it probably won't work for me because I've got, X, Y, Z. And like, no, that's on page 152. Somebody had that and they got well. And then, Dr. So-and-so says, no, he had patients with that and they got well, so, and I want it to be an ongoing resource. I put a website together to go with the book so that when people continue having stories, I really wanted it to be a resource for coaches, for therapists and doctors, or people who are struggling, with their own mental health issues, that they can look up and see that they're not alone, and that people have gotten well and really gotten well and living great lives, having been through the same thing that they have. So that's kind of how it started.
So that's how it started, but it's funny because you're like, I don't know how this happened. And I'm like listening, and I'm like, it's kind of like this is how it feels like and how I'm imagining it happened. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea came up, and then the more you started looking in that direction, it just grew and grew
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
grew. And then it just became a thing.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Because I remember the first couple of people I mentioned it to. I mentioned it to Dickin Bettinger and like a few of my other teachers, Bill Pettit, and they went, "Oh, that's a big project." They were like, "I don't know about that." I said, "Well, can I interview you?" Because I wanted to get some mental health professionals, interviews in there as well. And then I put some calls out. I put posts in a lot of Facebook groups and to other coaches and some of my own clients, just asking for stories. And and then the stories just started coming, and they were amazing. And I gave everybody the opportunity. They could either write it themselves. I gave them a word limit to like what around about what it should be. And I said, you could either write it yourself or I can interview you on Zoom and then I'll transcribe it and then you can have final approval. So that's what I did. And I collected over 45 stories. And they're all, in many ways, they're completely different. And yet they all have the same theme of, misunderstanding, struggling, searching, and then finding answers and getting well. So at first I thought, when I put all these stories together, it might feel a bit cultish, like, oh, they were all touched with fairy dust or something. But
Yeah.
someone said to me the other day, said, it's so impactful when you read story after story and you start seeing it's not a fluke. It's not just one-off situation. These people with everything from psychosis to bulimia to OCD, quite a lot of interesting phobias I'd never heard of, really debilitating stuff, had gotten well. And then what the other idea I had was at the back of the book, I collected information about some nonprofit organizations who are taking this into communities and into prisons and into schools to show that it's not just like one-off individuals. These stories are from all over the world, and these nonprofits are taking it into communities, and there's a lot of people who are being affected and getting, benefiting from this as well. Yeah.
Wow. We're gonna talk about that off camera because like I haven't introduced it yet to many people. So I'm gonna introduce it today. I'm starting a new platform called the Soulful Space. And in the Soulful Space, I'm going to have soulful books, and Hannah's book is going to be in there. I've already chosen, like I have 14 that have been chosen so far. So if you guys go to the Soulful Space HQ on Instagram, you're going to start seeing them going through. But I'm going to also do soulful projects. And I think that, because I'm not very aware of soulful projects yet. So it's kind of like, I'm just like, oh, wait, now this person does this and this person does that. So I'm interested in seeing who are the soulful projects I can add to my list now, So, so if we look, it's funny because as you were talking, you were saying that it feels cultish, but the more you read about it, the more it feels, and it's like the first thing the mind does, right? The mind goes to, oh yeah, well, like we go into the critique of it, and then we decide, oh, this is cultish, so let me not listen to it. When in fact, it's, I think, the most peaceful place. This conversation, like this understanding, brought me in such a place of love for me. The more I understand it, the more I meet the people, like, you and I have never met before, yet it feels so comfortable to be in this conversation and just have fun in exploring everything, and I think that that's what happens. We kind of decide something immediately and then we go with it, and then we're missing out on stuff, right? So I love that that's what's happening in your book, like, because the more we talk about it, the more we get grounded into it. Is that the sentiment that's coming out in your opinion from people who are reading it? Like they're understanding it more and more?
Yeah. Yeah, because my other books are novels. And so the novels, the characters do the searching and the falling down and the, and the finding and the happy ending. But in this one, the characters are actual real people. And, the first part of the book is kind of, call it a critique of traditional psychology and psychiatry. And I explain how the chemical imbalance thing is a complete myth. And even the psychiatrists who have kind of peddled this idea for a long time, like you'll see in a lot of the stories, they were told they have a chemical imbalance. That's why they were depressed or anxious. That's why they needed medication. And the top psychiatrists are coming out now and saying, no, it was never true. It was just an analogy. We didn't really mean that. And I'm like, But then hold on a minute, then why do people need medication? If there's no chemicals wrong in the brain, why would you need medication? They're still pushing the meds. So the people who've read it are saying, like, oh my gosh, now I understand why the medication didn't work. Now I understand why, my doctors didn't really understand how the brain works. So how could they have helped me? And so there's a lot of very, very. I'm not a scientist, so my explanation of a lot of the science is very simple. If I can understand it, then anybody can. And I am cynical, and I do believe that a lot of it is, based on money and the pharmaceutical companies. They wanted to push these ideas so that we'll buy more of their medications. But when you know that everybody has innate health, when you see the health in people, and you see that, and this is what I've often said this, I believe if you were to tell me any mental health diagnosis, I guarantee you it started with prolonged stressful thinking. And my teacher, Dr. George Pransky, once said to me, he said, all those diagnoses are really coping mechanisms. So when people get caught up in their prolonged stressful thinking, and it gets so unbearable, some people will drink, and some people, might use drugs, but other people are cutting, other people are eating, some people are not eating, some people are getting loud and violent, some people are like disappearing and you can't find them. There's lots of ways to either numb out or cope with those uncomfortable feelings. And I'm starting to see it more and more now as wisdom. Because if you, I had what I now believe would be called PTSD. I was mugged 3 times. And so I spent probably a good almost 10 years reliving the events. I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping, I was like hurting myself. I was a real mess because I didn't understand how my mind worked. And so I got worse and worse and worse until I was kind of rescued by a group of ladies from a crisis center who kind of scooped me up and like set me back on my feet and helped me to kind of rebuild my life. But until that point, I innocently didn't know that I was torturing myself with my own thinking. And when you do that and there doesn't seem to be a way out, then things like flipping out into another reality are actually wisdom, because maybe it's holding us together until we can get help. So all of those things like, addiction and all the obsessive rituals, or all the ways that people can try and cope with their uncomfortable feelings are actually, maybe it's like wisdom, just trying to hang on until we can get help. And I think that's the message of the book really is, that there really is, like it's Sid Banks's quote, that there's only one generic mental illness, a misunderstanding of the role of thought. And when you understand that, you're free,
Yeah. Yeah. You had this understanding, obviously, when you started writing the book. So what did you see for yourself? Like I'm sure like I do my podcasts and I get like, I look at season 5 and I'm like, we're in season 6 now. And I'm like, oh my God, I grew so much out of just having these conversations. So imagine you who's like doing all of the research, because I don't do research. I come on and I'm chatting away. So you did research and you talked with all these people. So what came of it for you? Like for your person?
Yeah, it's I think one of the biggest things it's done is giving me more and more confidence to kind of stand up, if you like, stand up to traditional therapy and psychologists and psychiatrists. Because I don't have any qualifications. I didn't even finish my college degree, right? I got into university, but I never finished it. And so I had the biggest chip on my shoulder for a very long time about not being academic. like I grew up in the UK, and we, you know, the way school was then is you at 16 you took exams, you know, we call them O levels, and then you went A levels, and then you went to university. I failed my English language O level 4 times. Right? I tried. I kept showing up to take it again for the next couple of years when I was studying something else. And I got the worst grade in math than you could probably possibly get unless you spell your own name wrong. Right? So thank God I had other talents, you know, and I went on and had this amazing career in Hollywood, and, you know, won an Academy Award as a team, and, you know, I've always made things with my hands. And I knew I wasn't stupid. I just didn't do well in school academically because I didn't understand a lot of stuff and I didn't know how to ask for help. So, and because I had this talent with like artistic creative stuff, I just got pushed into that stream all the time. Like, go, you make the costumes, you go do, you know, you paint the picture, you work, you build that, you know. And so I would do that and I get credit for that. And so the kind of academic stuff just fell away. And then when I was working in Hollywood and I started to want to like move up in like being a producer and like company supervisor, and I had to like learn the business side of filmmaking. And then that's when I started realizing, I don't know. I don't know how to do spreadsheets, and I can't spell, and, you know, all these kind of things. And I started getting insecure about it. And I remember a producer saying to me one time, she says, wow, you do have a brain. And I'm like, oh, thank you. You know, because I'd done some report for her. And I was like, oh, thank you. Yes, thank you. I do have a brain. So when I started writing books, that insecurity really came up. And I remember the very first book that I wrote, the first manuscript, I kind of did it incognito. I didn't tell anyone because I hadn't written anything since I was in high school, you know, and here I was in my early 50s. And so the first friend I asked to read it, she happens to be a book developer, and I said to her, if it's a pile of rubbish, please be nice to me, you know. And actually sent, you know, like I remember like on my computer, go back to press send, you know, so I was going to send it to her in an email. And it was one of the scariest things I've ever done. And I've done some pretty scary things, you know. I've been on a bus that exploded. I've like spoken in front of 1,000 people, you know, done all kinds of things. But sending my writing to somebody was actually really scary. And I said to her, please be nice to me. Let me down gently, right? And she read the first couple of chapters of my first book, and she said to me, it needs work, but it's going to be worth it. Let's keep going. I was like, okay, all right. And then it just kept coming. And then so the next 2 books, like the ideas were just like boom, 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 boom. Like the creativity just, it was like once this chip on my shoulder disappeared, that I'm not academic and I can't write and I can't spell. Once that, which was only made of thinking in the first place, right? And thank God for spell check and, you know, calculators and editors. So that chip on my shoulder fell away. And I started seeing that I can do this. But then with this book, because it's more of an academic book, it really is a textbook. Yeah. I started thinking, well, who's going to listen to me? Because you know, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a PhD. So that's why I think at the beginning I thought, well, if I interview other PhDs and doctors and put their interviews into the book, then that will give it some gravitas, you know, that will make it seem more legit. And then somewhere in the middle of writing the whole thing, I just accepted the identity that I write books now, and I've done several book clubs on my other ones where I've had medical doctors and PhDs come to my book clubs and I'm teaching them, which I get such a kick out of. Little do they know that I have like 0 qualifications. I have a lot of experience. And then one of the things on my bucket list has always been to write a research paper to get get published in a medical journal. And a couple of days ago, Tom Kelly, who's I don't know if you know that name, but he's a professor in the US. He's published over 40 evidence-based 3 principles articles in recognized journals. And he's asked me to co-author a paper with him. And I'm like, yes!
That's so exciting. So exciting.
So for anybody listening, it's like there are no limits, you know, like that's I mean, that's one of the messages of the book. Like, no matter what label you've been given, what diagnosis, what you've been through, what all kinds of hell that you've experienced, there are no limits, including academia and qualifications, because there are those of us who are doing incredible work, and it's coming from our hearts and from our experience,
Yeah.
and that's what people are relating to.
Yeah. Is that the truth is not necessarily in knowledge.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I've often joked that I've met people with PhDs who I would not trust my cat with, you know.
Uh,
Right?
yeah, I wish I knew this when I was like in my 20s.
Yeah.
I wish I knew this, but even then, if I look back in my 20s, I went through whatever I had to go through to get me where I am today. But the important things is to not lose hope. I remember Dr. Pettit. I remember him saying this most of the time when I talk to people, what I hear, the first thing I hear is the lack of hope.
Yeah.
Like, so
Yeah.
it's like there's always hope. There's always a possibility. It's kind of like look within and see what you can see.
Yeah.
I mean, of all the like obviously you said how many stories you have in the book? 40?
Over 40, yeah.
Over 40. So
Yeah.
which one, I know you probably love them all since you've chosen them, but which one was like one that you're like, like that really got to you?
Oh my gosh, so many of them, and like, if anyone's listening who's their stories, thank you. Like, they're
Yeah,
so generous in sharing their stories. I mean, some of them are quite there's a lot of vulnerability and humiliation in some of them, and my editor suggested I put a trigger warning on some of them because some of the darkness that human beings can get into pretty dark places.
yeah,
And I opted to just discuss trigger warnings because from a principles understanding that doesn't even really make sense. And then, but I also wanted to be respectful because I've been coaching people for over 30 years, so I'm used to hearing some tragedy and terrible things, and I know not everybody is. So some of them stories are a little bit graphic and a little bit dark. But one of the stories that just came to mind when we were just talking about qualifications is Derek Mason. I don't know if you're familiar with Derek. He's
Derek was a guest. He was a guest in season 5.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Well, I first met Derek when he was still in prison. So
Okay.
I had the privilege of going into jail with Jacqueline Hollows when she was running Beyond Recovery, and I went in to see Derek's group were graduating a peer mentoring program, and so I was like me and Brooke Wilden Reese. She runs Spark. She and I
Yes.
were like the audience, for their graduation because they
Yes.
can't have a lot of people in prison. Um, and that's when I first met him, and he got out, and then I bumped into him at the first conference he was able to get to, and it's been great to watch him over the years. And so he gave his story of dyslexia, and reading his story, you can see, like, as a kid in school, like, kind of like I was saying, if only he'd gotten help at the beginning of that journey, he might have not had had to end up on the street and in prison. And I mean, I'm sure if you asked him, it's like he doesn't regret anything because it's got into. But in the story, he says when he's doing a program in some other jail, this young man says to him, he says, "But you don't understand. We haven't been to university like you have." And Derek's like, "I didn't go to university. I spent my time, I was 10, 15 years in jail. Oh, that's where I learned this stuff, the University of Life. So, that was a really, really cute one. And another one that pops into my mind is Cecilia Hector. She's from Sweden, I think. She's
I
Swedish.
think so.
Yeah, and she had all kinds of hellish problems, like her family forced her to have electric shock treatments, all kinds of terrible things happened. She told me when she was writing her story, she didn't know which diagnosis to pick to feature in her story because there were so many. And I've got a few people like that. And then right at the end, she says, she realized she wasn't broken, that's why she doesn't need treatment. And that's when I started thinking, yeah, if there is no chemical imbalance and we can't ever be broken, then we don't need treatment. We need understanding. And some of his stories are like that, where it was all misunderstanding. And then when they start to have insights and shifts in their thinking and understand how the mind really works, then you just see them kind of their wellness just pops off the page. So I have there's so many in there. And Jacqueline Hollows is another good example. I mean, I've known her for almost 10 years now, but when she told her story of her childhood and the trauma and the abuse that she went through, it's absolutely incredible that she's now dedicated her life to helping other people. Because when people say, oh, I went through trauma, I can't do anything, like I'm broken because of the things I went to. Jacqueline went through hell as a child, terrible abuses, and she's just living her life, giving to other people now. So many of the stories are great examples of that resilience, that human triumph over adversity. It doesn't define you. It's not who you are, and the next chapters are just starting.
It's funny, like as you're speaking, like what comes to mind for me is how, when you said it's just you have to get understanding. So one of the things that happened to me when I was in my 20s is I lived in an apartment with my boyfriend at the time, and I had two dogs, and the neighbor upstairs, it was living hell. Like it was a living hell because she found ways to harass me and to threaten, that I would lose my dogs. And back then my dog was like, well, my pets, I shouldn't say back then because it's still like this.
Right.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
like it's my kids. And that was like 30 some years ago. And I only figured out last year that that had been a traumatic experience for me. I intellectually knew that I didn't want to talk to neighbors. Like it was kind of like, okay, no, I don't want to talk to neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of stayed with me for 30 years. And last year, I figured out that that was like PTSD, like you were saying that you had PTSD because of muggings, but I knew it was traumatizing me, but I didn't want to put a label of trauma because my intellect was telling me, come on, grow up. You know, like this was nothing. But no, the fact is, it was something. It was something to me. It
Mm-hmm.
stressed me. I lost a lot of sleep. I cried. I did a lot of things because of that. And it's carried me through to now. And I still, yesterday morning, I was walking and I was walking with the dog and I lifted my head up and I saw a neighbor and I saw my reaction. How, it wasn't, I didn't think about it, but I saw my reaction of fear around it. And I was like, it's still there. But I understand it now and it doesn't have to rule my life, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Yeah. 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 Trauma is and it's a fascinating thing because we often talk about separate realities because two people could go through the same experience and one person is traumatized and the other one is not. And I mean, let's say I was mugged 3 times or 3 violent incidences anyway. But let's say some people could have experienced the things I went through, and that might just be an average Friday night for them on the way home from the pub. Getting beat up and fighting and stuff might be just a way of life. Or if you're a prison guard, violence is part of your job, sadly. And so it all comes down to our personal interpretation of it. And so and and like a lot of the people I've worked with trauma, like the event itself, I mean, you can have events like yours that kind of went on over a period of time, or you can have like these one isolated events. And mine were isolated events that probably lasted only for like maybe 2 minutes tops. But the torture I went through in my mind lasted a good 10 years. And that's what really dysregulated my my sleep and my eating and all that kind of stuff, the reliving it and reliving it, the worrying, and for me it was the sound of footsteps, like the sound of footsteps would, my nervous system would jolt, like you just described. And I could be like, on the other side of the world in California, like walking on the beach, playing frisbee with my friends, and like someone would run by, jogging or run for a bus, I'd be, and it took a long time for that to go away. It did go away. So I can tell people it can and does go away. And then funny thing happened about a couple of years ago. It'd probably been about, I don't know, 10, 15 years since I'd had one of those jolts. And I was walking in the park here early in the morning. People are out walking their dog and, jogging and everything. And I'm just walking in the park. And two men, I could hear them like behind me talking. And they came. And as they came up behind me, they separated and went around me, which is not really a nice thing to do to a woman. But they weren't thinking. It was, there were a lot of people around. It wasn't a big deal. But suddenly my nervous system went like this. Something jolted me, that feeling of footsteps, men's voices, and going around me. And immediately my thinking went, oh, I shouldn't be feeling like this anymore. It's been so many years. It's 30 years ago since it happened. And I'm a 3 principles coach. And, my thinking speeded up and I went up in my head. Thank God for my grounding, because I heard it immediately. I felt the change in my being almost. Because my life's pretty peaceful these days. I don't have many situations that upset me or get me, revved up like that. And so I was able to catch it really quickly. And then I had an insight, and I thought, you know what? If like I live in Israel, like I'm in Jerusalem. So if I were walking in the park and I suddenly heard a Manchester accent, I would also probably look around. Because I lived in Manchester for 6 years and a lot of stuff happened to me in Manchester. So it's part of my history, the same as the muggings are part of my history. I'm not in denial about them. I don't live with the terror of it anymore, but it is part of my story. And in that moment, I got to see that it just got filed in my head. Same as I lived in London for 6 years. I lived in California for 16 years. I've lived in lots of different places. I had different jobs and different relationships. And they're kind of like filed in my head now. And I haven't had that feeling since then. And it's just kind of got put in its place. And so one of my favorite Sid Banks quotes is, he says, I think it's in Second Chance, and he says, to go back into the past from a low mood is psychological suicide. So that 10 years of PTSD was basically me going back into the past from a low mood and torturing myself. But now I can talk about my past in quite graphic detail. I thought I was going to die. And yet I can tell it from this better state of mind, with understanding and compassion, even forgiveness, because it's not happening now. And my perspective of it is completely different. And to me, that's where trauma, I don't believe I have trauma anymore. I went through some very scary experiences. It's not held in my body. It's not even taking up space in my mind. It's filed away in like a history file somewhere, along with all those other things that have happened to me, good and bad. But it's not who I am, and so it doesn't have to affect me now.
I love it.
And that really feels like freedom.
I love it. Wow, I love that story. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So we've busted our time already. I knew we would. But before we hang up, where can people get your book? I'm guessing Amazon.
Yes. Yes. All 4 books are on Amazon. So you can either put in my name and it'll come up. So the first 3 are novels. And then this one, Beyond Diagnosis, it is a big book. It is a textbook. Yeah. So that is also there. It was #1 bestseller in Amazon hot releases in the first 2 days, which is really exciting. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the books are on Amazon. Yeah.
Okay, great. And if you said you wanted it to be a resource for people, do you have a website for?
Yeah. Yes. So the website is also called Beyond Diagnosis, but there's a hyphen in the middle. So it's beyond-diagnosis.com. And on there, you can get in touch with me. You can I have a page for news stories. So it can be a video, it could be written, it could be audio, whatever people feel comfortable. It could be anonymous. You can change your name. It's fine, whatever people want to, if they want to share their story of recovery from whatever mental health challenge they've had. I'd love to keep adding stories there. Yeah. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very, very much for joining me. It was a pleasure meeting you. I loved
My
what you did.
pleasure. Yes, thank you.
All right. Well, everybody else, I hope you've enjoyed. And I'm going to say, dream it, dare it, do it, live the life you want. And I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.